Okay, welcome everybody. This is our English speaking session, the English breakout room. We're going to pull up the screen. So now that we've heard Bing give the overview of where things have come for the repeal and replacement of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and Delaney gave context to this first discussion item we're going to be looking at is the rights and responsibilities to provide safe drinking water. And hearing those videos from some of the experts in water, now it's for us to have a discussion, or yourselves, and I'll be facilitating that for you, thinking about those options. And some of you may have been part of those engagement sessions back in 2019 when AFN came across to the regions to talk about some of these options. And they shared with you in that slide and in the PowerPoint package that was given to you, what people didn't want to see, and then what we have here for discussion is how to characterize this now going forward. So for discussion is talking about should this new legislation characterize First Nations water rights in direct or aspirational form in the preamble of a legislation, and then within the body of it to have a strong non-derogation and non-abrogation rights clause, and have no mention of Crown rights throughout the document. So this is up for discussion right now, and I'm just going to leave it open for people to consider and to talk about. And we are going to be a little bit pressed for time here because we also have to save time to do the Menti poll towards the end of our session here. So we're going to run to about we said 11:30. So what are people's thoughts on hearing the videos? And was anybody part of those 2019 engagement sessions? People still thinking about it? Maybe I'll start here. I'm just going to kind of go down the list here, and I'm seeing some of the videos that are on. I see a Derek Chief. You're a water technician. Maybe if you'd like to share a little bit about your thoughts on this subject. You're probably like, don't pick me.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what to think about it. It's pretty crazy anyways, that's for sure. That they can't get water to like the First Nation communities, but they can even bring pipelines and all that other stuff all towards their communities, through their communities, but yet they can't bring fresh drinking water to them. It's kind of a weird. I don't know what else to say.
Okay. You're still considering that. Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep going down the list here. I see a Glenn McKinnon. Would you like to share some of your thoughts on this topic item? You're on mute. We can't hear you.
The host unmuted me? Fine. Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, I'm from working at Pakwashipi in northern Quebec, and I was very interested to understand that there's no federal regulation as far when you're off on reserve versus off reserve. And also, we don't have a lot of issues with our drinking water. But the source of our water comes from the river. So I'm wondering about the river protection as far as the environment is concerned and protecting the source of the water for our community. There's been some issues recently with wood cutting and logging too close to the riverbed, which could have environmental impacts on our water source in the future. So when you open up the discussion as far as the environment is concerned, well, then you open up it's a salmon river, so there's other protection issues or conservation issues and protecting the source of the water for our community. So I'm interested in that aspect.
And that's going to be coming up when we have a discussion on the transboundary water. That will be in this. We'll have that on source water protection in that discussion as well.
Yeah, because it's interesting because our water source comes from a river that connects Newfoundland, Labrador with Quebec. It originates in one province and it flows to another province. So that's an interesting. I find that very interesting.
Okay,
Hi, my name is
you.
Casey McLaren. I just want to add on to that because I'm from Quebec First Nation and we're kind of in the same boat as that. So I find it weird how there's not like a kind of set of guidelines for rivers or streams that fall into, different provinces and stuff. Like there has to be a better way to, protect that stream and stuff like that. Another thing, I find it really strange how it's not really Aboriginal driven, First Nation driven. And it's something that the government proposed, came up, and then we kind of were added on to it at the end in a sense. So I don't really understand that part, considering it is about drinking water for us. So yeah, that's kind of just my thoughts on the video.
Are you talking about the law itself? The
The
drinking water laws?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, Bing gave a good example or shared the history of how that law came to be and why it was problematic. He named some of the issues with that, and which is why we're at where we are now in terms of Prime Minister Trudeau introducing that there will be a repeal and replacement of that law, but that law needs to be developed with First Nations. Hence the initial engagements that had happened in 2019. And unfortunately, pandemic hit, and that stalled a lot of the in-person discussions. But again, the AFN is back through the regional discussions to keep that conversation going, and that's where we are now. It's further refining that discussion that happened 2 years ago. And again, one of the key items for discussion was this first one we're talking about now, is the rights and responsibilities to provide that safe drinking water. So in thinking of developing a new law, how would that best be framed? And again, if you look at that PowerPoint, I don't know if we can go back up, those options again. Where Delaney gave those three key topic areas there. That's what is AFN is seeking information on from the regions and from First Nations to talk about, how would they like to see that law drafted? Is it putting on the concept of our First Nation water rights in the preamble of a law, and then including the stronger language that the rights cannot be abrogated or derogated within the body of the legislation? And those options that were presented previously gave that as number 3. Number 2 is talking about, do you characterize everything within the body of legislation? And then there was pros and cons to that for people to consider. And again, some of the pros again is that it sets clarity of what what the rights are, but then the cons is that it could be difficult to negotiate going forward, and it could have some risks for legal precedent in that it frames what the rights are within this body of legislation. It doesn't allow it to grow or evolve. So that was the concern with option 2. And so this one here is option 3 of what we have on the screen here. Again, putting that language of our rights within the law in the preamble, and then having the strong language that those rights cannot be abrogated or derogated within the body. So that's the discussion item we're hoping to have right now. What's your thoughts on that? Just that piece would be. And I don't know how many people are familiar with the current law that's in place right now, that was put in place in 2013.
I seen the act there at our treatment plant, and like I've read a bit of it, but I'm not too familiar with it.
Yeah.
I know there is like some parts where it's like who's responsible for what. And I know like here there for like water boiling advisories, it's like, is it the operator? Is it the people that work at the water plant? Is it the health center? It's kind of like back and forth. Well, you guys should be doing it, or and stuff like that. Not too familiar with the act though.
Yeah, so definitely there was a number of issues that were wrong with the current law, and it's been put in place but not totally enforced yet because they haven't built regulations on it yet. So it is the opportunity at this point now to develop a new one that again is built around First Nations needs. So that's the discussion item here. Are there anybody else that'd like to put their discuss some of this? I see a Brendan on. Brendan Montour. Would you like to share?
Yes. I don't have a problem with wording things in an aspirational form. I think that could be a very good idea in terms of looking into the future for law. That doesn't mean that we have to stay with the existing system as it goes. Obviously, it's not working. It doesn't get us anywhere. So I think in terms of aspirations, it's important, I think, to have that at this level, which would be, you know, we're looking at provinces and a national level, but even for each First Nation or each individual territory, because I think some of the times it is a challenge to get some kind of recognition of your local political aspirations, your goals, and even your jurisdiction. So I think for here, it is very important to have something in aspirational form because you're setting the direction for years to come. It may not get there, you know, but I think it's very important to keep that picture in the future, to keep working towards it. The other part, in terms of something a little more substantive for regulations and enforcement, that definitely is needed. I know that we've been talking about protocol since 2003, 2004, and politically it is a real hot potato. It doesn't go anywhere. Nobody wants to pick it up because you're always stuck in between a federal law, provincial law, local law. So you're kind of like it depend, and your progress is going to depend a lot on the political will of your community. If the political will isn't there, you're kind of like stuck, and you're going to be looking to other communities that are a little bit more ahead and saying, well, what makes their system work well, or why do they have a good system operating and working here? So we know that there's and we know across the territories there are different levels of let's say, proficiency or how they operate their systems, whether their water plant is newer or older, or they're in the process of making a new water plant. The old one it's done its service life. So those are all kinds of things that that a lot of people are busy on, and I think that on the political level, a lot of these things need to be taken care of with some actual legal backing too. They need to have some like almost, you almost need a legal team here to work on some of these things too. Anyway, those are some of my comments.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I also, before we get too far down, I just wanted to, I'm going to put in the chat option here. There's a poll item as you're sitting here thinking about it. There's a poll item there that we're going to be completing in our breakout groups, and then we'll combine all the results when we get to back to the main plenary after 11:30. So there, the poll, if we were going to quickly switch to that, walks us through some questions. So when you click on that link, you enter that code in there, and it prompts you to answer some questions. Some are in English and some are in French. The top part is French. Okay, so that first one there looks at, first question asks, do you identify as First Nations, yes or no? The second question asks you, do you identify as a First Nation, whether that's a chief, council, hereditary chief? And you can answer those as you go through and go to the next one. And then it goes into the discussion item we're talking about today, is how important is the repeal and replacement of the Safe Drinking Water Act that's to you? Is it very important, somewhat important, neutral, or not important? And then slide 4, as you go to the next question, asks, as we begin to push forward new legislation, how quickly do you want to see legislation created? In this year of 2021? Will it be next year, 2022, or over the next 3 years? And then it goes into the discussion item we're having right now, that do you agree that the new legislation should characterize First Nation water rights in direct or aspirational form in the preamble of the document, with a strong non-derogation or non-abrogation of rights clause in the body, and there be no mention of what the Crown rights are? And you can choose yes, no, or maybe on that. And then you have the option in slide 5 to do a word bubble for you to share what are your biggest concerns regarding the inclusion of water rights in new legislation. And it's up for you to share what you think that is. So I encourage you to take some time to do that as we're discussing this. And during the break, all those will be compiled and we'll be bringing those back to you or in the main plenary. So again, a lot of info to take in if you haven't been part of this process previously, but being aware this has been a long time coming now. You saw the resolutions throughout the years that have again mandated the AFN to address that law put in place and to repeal and replace it, and a number of initiatives that have happened over the course of the last few years to ensure that happens. And so now the AFN is back again to seek feedback to further refine what should go into this law. Is there anybody else that's on that would like to jump in and share a little bit more on what they think with that discussion question? And as always, if you don't feel comfortable in talking, you can also put it in the chat option.
Billy,
It's
I
your
see you've
discussion.
unmuted yourself. Did you want to share some comments?
What did you say? Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I just saw you unmuted yourself. I was wondering if you wanted to share some comments.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to explain our drinking water plant in my community. I am Billy. I'm the guy responsible for my drinking water in my community in the Scapin Nation of Kawajumash, which is northern Quebec. And it was interesting what Brandon was saying regarding leadership in your communities lobbying for drinking water, wastewater plants. I think it's important that you have uh, good people around you, like to work with. Well, in my community, we work with an engineering firm, and together we lobbied for better drinking water, including our leaderships. Our and we did a good job. This summer, we're planning a major upgrade in our community for drinking water. Our community is growing. More houses are built and buildings. So we're going to increase the amount of reservoir we're going to have in our community. So we lobbied for that for years. And I think it's important that you have a good team to work with to lobby for better drinking water in your community. And this is very important. Maybe pretty sure that most communities don't have that, and it's important that you have a good team to lobby that. That's what we did. So we use a good membrane technology to treat our drinking water. We use surface water, and it's very good. The drinking water is very good. So we started in 2004, 2005 for an upgrade in our community. Our water plant was simple back then. It just was a pumping station and underground water, and the water was bad that time. And since Walkerton happened, our community started working like to have better drinking water. So we did an upgrade in 2006, and we're doing another upgrade this summer. So two upgrades past 15 years now. 15, yeah, 15 years. So our community is very good with drinking water. So we regularly test our drinking water, send our samples to a laboratory, and the results are always good. So we take good care of our drinking water maintenance, and our budget is good. And we work with our designer, H2O Innovation, uh, to do maintenance together. They do site visits regularly in our community, check the system, what needs to be done, replaced, and it's very important that. So we're a good team. So I've been there like almost 20 years, over 21 years now. So I'm a senior in our team. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So we heard that it takes a good team to do lobbying and advocating for the future needs of communities. Wonderful. So we have 3 minutes left. Is there anybody else that'd like to comment on the theme of rights and responsibility? Well, there's a few more we haven't heard from in the group. I see a Martin Morris or a Maxime Kondo. I don't know if they're on the line, if they wish to share anything.
I'm here, but I'm just a listener, really.
Hi, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm very similar. I'm learning how it's going on a government level, so it's basically a learning process for me.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I encourage you to take the poll if you haven't already.
Yes.
It's just like when it comes to the once it's recognized, ratified the laws they want. So I was just wondering how the codes and the procedures, how we're going to train our people, educate them, awareness. Are there steps to be taken with that? I was just wondering about that stuff.
Yeah, there's lots to consider, and I think that's why when they did the first engagement, they broke it down into 5 key themes for the main parts of the new legislation. And we're going to have a discussion. I believe it's breakout item number 5 that's going to have a discussion further on standards and regulations. So that will be towards the end of the day, in how that would roll out and how that would work. What is people's best thoughts for standards and regulations, whether from a national level, a local level, regional level. So we'll have that discussion there as well.
Okay.
So nothing is set in right now. Everything is an opportunity to get your views across, as the document is going to be crafted. So we are closing the breakout room in 30 seconds and counting. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to complete the poll, and then we go into a break. We have a 10-minute break, and then we resume back in plenary at 11:40. So thank you, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So the next discussion item is going to be, welcome back, Bing, is going to be on the discussion item we just talked about with governance. So this is our next topic for discussion. The new legislation should create a high-level approach and structure for First Nation water governance with an opt-in approach to be considered. A water commission should be explored. So I'm going to open up the discussion now for people to provide their thoughts on what they think with those options, and in general, this option that we have on the screen. You heard a really good breakdown from Maryland's video talking about the how, the what, and the how. So thinking about some of those, of what would work best in your community or in your region.
Hi, Casey McLaren here again. Personally, I really liked it. I really enjoyed that video. It kind of explained it more. I don't know. Personally, I think the best thing would be the co-design mixed with like a regional approach and the watershed for how. For a regional approach, I would think more of a like nation to nation wise. Just because I know from my experience anyways working, Algonquin share the watershed of the Ottawa River. So I know it'd be good to like kind of work together something else. So I know the Algonquins could like kind of protect out their watershed that is providing drinking water. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you, Casey, for sharing that. Do we have anybody else that'd like to provide their thoughts or ideas on this?
Hi, it's Catherine here. I just wanted to, I don't know if everyone is aware of this. In the Quebec region, there is a non-First Nation network of watershed organizations that already exists. I know some of them have reserved seats for the nations whose land they're on. However, I'm not sure how the collaboration is going in all regions, but just that, like in the landscape of this region, there is that network that exists, and some nations might have relationships, some nations might not with the the watershed organizations. So I just wanted to put that out there, that this is part of the landscape here.
Okay.
A part of that though, like I know, for example, there is some like the Ottawa River Keepers, there's the OBVT for us, like it's the watershed organization for Turisme. Those are considered two separate and they don't really communicate with each other. So that's why it'd be better to have the Algonquin Nation there, just to kind of, think of it as like a whole wider picture. I'm fairly young and new at this, so I'm not sure if it's just Algonquins like using that watershed, so it could be others, but that's just like how I thought of it. But it makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. You just exactly like illustrated my point, which is that there's like clearly a lack of relationships and communication. So thank you so much for bringing your knowledge here. That was awesome.
Thanks, Catherine, for providing a little bit of what's happening in the region here. So open up the floor. Is there anybody else that would like to share their thoughts on this? And thinking again about some of those options that were presented, what are your thoughts on creating a high-level approach and structure for First Nations water governance? And if that is in the case, and you agree with that, would it be an opt-in approach? I'm going to go down the list again. If I'm not hearing from people, I'm going to start again with Derek. Derek, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
No, not right now. What things?
You're still thinking about it. That's fine. And as well, as you're thinking about some of this, and if you have something or an option that you'd like to talk about, that can also be expressed in the round table at the end of the day if something comes to you after that. I'm going to look to Glenn. Glenn, would you like to share anything? Your thoughts on it?
I agree with the Water Commission, and I agree with the opt-in approach, but every community has its own issues to deal with and their own capacity to deal with certain issues. So it's a question of capacity. It's also a question of the human resources available to take on such a file. Some communities have different capacities than other communities and different interests, and they're not able to necessarily put the resources forward necessarily. The interest might be there, but the resources, human resources and financial resources might not be there. So it's a community based on the community, and if it's a priority for the community, and can they put the resources, or do they have the personnel to go in and push those files? But I agree with the commission and an opt-in approach, because that relates to community capacity also.
Great. Thank you for providing that. And also with the concerns around the capacity. Again, that was something that was raised in the presentation as well. I keep being mindful of time here because I know we're at the lunch break. And I encourage you also to go to Menti to fill in some of the questions regarding this subject item into the poll. Who else is on that we haven't heard from? See, a Griffin. I don't know if that's the first name or the last name. We also have a Brendan Montour and Martin Morris from Ganawagi. Are either of them on that are interested in providing their thoughts on this? Okay, someone's mic is not working. Okay. You could also put your thoughts in the chat option as well, if that's helpful to you.
I could give 2 cents. I think that the governance approach or cooperative governance approach might work, but it depends on the availability of the people working on both sides. It was interesting to see when Meryl Ann was going through these options. I think I've been involved in a project or a negotiation or a topic that hit every one of those things. And I've seen something that can happen when you're working like that. And it becomes it is hard to coordinate, because when you're gonna have, and exactly like you said, you're creating silos. If something happens in one of those other silos or one of those other governments, then their schedule is off. You know, I don't know how many times I would see when we're trying to get somewhere and negotiating with the province on something, and then, oh, well, there's an election, so say goodbye after 6 to 7 months, and that happens. I've also seen on a local level, neighboring towns, sometimes they make decisions without any consultation. They don't even know people. So like Catherine's comment about the river protection groups or riparian groups, some of those things there, at least in Quebec, there is a language barrier with some of the communities. I've seen a lot more openness in Ontario whenever I've gone to see and participate in things. Whereas over here or in Ganawag, it's more of an English speaking community, or it's an English speaking community with very little French coming across. So we get kind of lost in the shuffle for that. And sometimes the same thing happens for information from the Quebec government too. But I agree that there should be, it would be, I think, a very good idea to have a commission. And this way, I think the communities that are more prepared to share their expertise and advance their systems, whether it's going to be on the governments or just plain infrastructure, they're ready, and they can provide a little bit of a roadmap for the other communities who are starting on that process. And it could be, it can be a source of reference and support for them. I look at some things like a separate but parallel approach. Reminds me of a two-row wampum for Five Nations Confederacy, how governance is supposed to work. They're supposed to stay in their own canoe, or we stay in our canoe and they stay in their ship. And I look at it and go, well, a lot of times you're going to look at it and say, well, what happened here? That sometimes, well, that ship has gotten really big. And it's kind of making a canoe look small, so they take over the whole water. That's some of the things that I can see can happen, you know. So and an opt-in approach, I think when some of the different nations are ready, then sure. But I am a little bit reluctant or a little bit hesitant of having people, because it could make for a patchwork of legislation where people, well, I don't want to follow it. It's too much responsibility, and they look for something else. So we have to be careful of that too. Thanks.
Thank you, Brandon. That was a really good explanation of some of the unique processes that are happening in the region here, and some observations on how that could work. So thank you for that.
Well,
Yeah. Oh, was somebody going to speak? Okay, so I'm going to move us on to the poll. And again, in the chat option there, it had the go to menti.com, and then you're entering that code. And then maybe we'll look at some of the questions that are here. So again, it's discussion on this item here, and that's, do you agree that the new legislation should create a high-level approach and structure for First Nations water governance with an opt-in approach to be considered. And then a water commission should be explored. And so it asks you for your yes, no, or maybe thoughts on that. And then this next question is, should a water commission be explored? And then the final piece on this is, again, should governance pursue an opt-in approach? And again, we heard some examples in there of that should be something to be considered as First Nations become ready or require assistance to be part of this process. Are there any other thoughts or feedback from the participants that are on the call? Isn't that just segues into lunch? And I don't like to be the person that's standing in the way of lunch and food. So if there's no further questions, and again, okay. All right. So with that, I believe we're going to take a break now for lunch, and we will resume back in the main plenary at 1 p.m. And again, as always, if your mic isn't working or you're unable to provide those feedback, you can also do it through the chat option or share towards the end of the discussion. So thank you, everyone. Have a good break.
So just so folks know, normally in the bottom right-hand corner, everybody's device might be a little different, but you're looking for the button that says
Okay, welcome back again, everybody. So we just heard, before we went into the video, the options that were discussed back in 2019 and are brought forward to you again for further discussion. And some were favored, some were not favored. And we also heard a bit this morning of people sharing a little bit about their concerns with source water protection. And that is the topic of our discussion for this piece here. And should the new legislation clearly set out First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserve? I'm going to open it up for people. Anybody has a burning thought or ideas to come forward and share your.
Hi, it's Casey here.
Hi.
I think it should, just because we are land users as well. We're not just on reserve. We don't just stay on reserve. We also use the territory around it. So I believe it should. That's just my thoughts.
Those are good thoughts. Thank you for sharing that. What do other people think of this? Thinking about your communities, experiences that you faced with source water?
Hi. Yeah, I agree. It should be included. Like here, well, we're on groundwater, but the river is right beside us, and then there's like just upstream. There's multiple hydro dams that we don't really know what could be affect our own water here. So yeah, I think that's a good idea to include that.
Where are you located?
Nemaska First Nation.
Oh, okay, thank you. So we've had a couple agree that there needs to be clearly set out First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserve. What about other people's thoughts on this? I'm just gonna look at my list again. Martin Morris, are you there?
Hi, I'm here.
Hi.
Oh, over here, I think we're pretty lucky with the surrounding municipalities that notify us, our environment office, when they're doing something, say, as a raw sewage dump or something like that. So we're not necessarily in the same boat as other remote communities, I would say. So it's really interesting that I believe, yes, we should have jurisdiction to protect source waters, especially remote communities that are not the same as us. We're very lucky in our situation. So I'm interested to hear from more northern communities to see what situations they are in and how they would handle it, or what they have to deal with presently.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for sharing that. I see Maxime. Maxime, are you on to provide your thoughts on this?
Yes, I'm on. We have our own community wells here, but we do live right by the Grand Cascapedia River. We don't use that as our drinking water. But like I said, we do have our own community wells. I have no problem with our neighboring communities, but it's a language issue. We speak French and we mostly speak English here. So if there's any communication, it's, you know, well, fortunately I speak French, but there's a lot of people that don't, but there's that problem too. But we're okay with our neighboring communities.
So you have a little bit of a language barrier there, but obviously a good relationship with your neighboring jurisdictions.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I see a mic, but I don't know how to say that last piece there. It's Tech Paku Shipi.
Hello.
Hi.
Yep. Yeah, definitely that should be protection for the source water. I'm Michael Menace, Kitigan Zibi, Anishinaabe. I'm working with the Innu in Pakushipu at the water plant, and yeah, it was. We get the water here from the surface river, and we've got a good system, but without protecting the water, the headwaters or that would be a real issue. So I think the jurisdiction should cover that for all communities, so you can have a say or some input on what's going on upstream. I've been at the water for a short time now, 3 years maybe, and this is all new to me, so I enjoy this opportunity. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Mike. I'm going to see, is Emily Jerome on?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, we can hear you.
My question is, with this, when this new legislation is completed, will non-native communities have to follow it as well as we do?
I don't believe so.
So this is only for natives. So how can we be sure that they're going to be protecting the water just as much as we are?
And I think that's something that the video alluded to, was the need, you know, whatever option is chosen and comes forward, that there's going to need to be some form of agreements and discussions with municipalities, but maybe Bing will speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, you're heading in the right direction there, Melissa. The video was, I think, clear that anything that would go into the legislation would spell out how First Nations and entities off reserve in other boundaries, for example, provinces. And in one case that was brought up right at the start, our international neighbors, that would need to be spelled out. And we would have to do our best to include those in the legislation. And that's what that's about. Is there's got to be a two-way agreement, and that would be one of the, I would think, major areas of negotiations as we're moving forward. To put that in the legislation, I think is a really good idea, as some have said. But we would need support agreement on both sides. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I might add to that, oh, sorry. Did you want to say something, Melissa?
No,
I was just going to say, there's also a lot of diversity from region to region as to like water, like non-First Nation water jurisdictions. So in some regions, municipalities, for example, have some rights. In other regions, they might not have it. So there's a lot of, yeah, the issue of jurisdiction is a large one. And it's pretty complex in this region for sure. Like, for example, anything that's related to protecting riparian zones is generally something that is dealt with by municipalities. I'm talking just like non-Indigenous jurisdiction here. And then the actual water itself can be either like provincial or federal, depending what water bodies we're talking. So there's a lot of players involved. So there would definitely be some need for some discussion around how do First Nations principles around protecting water, how are those respected, and make sure that those are at the core of what we're doing.
That's, yeah, absolutely right. That it's going to be a big discussion, a tough discussion, I would think, moving forward. And you're right, across the country, there's nations have different issues, larger issues like the dams in northern BC, how much they're affecting not only their source of water, but also wildlife and traditional areas and archaeological areas.
I was going to say, you want to talk dams? I think pretty much anyone here has got dams on their territory, really large ones.
And that leads me to seeking another opinion. I'm looking to either Billy or Derek, who I believe in the northern communities, maybe to share some of their thoughts on this subject.
Hi, it's Derek.
Hi.
I'm from the northern Quebec, from the James Bay area. We usually we deal with Hydro Quebec on our water on our water plan. It's under the one of the agreements that we have with Hydro is to supply the drinking water to East Main, and most of everything that we do at the water treatment plant, Hydro pays for it. And so I don't see any reason why we cannot protect any of our watersheds or anything like that. One of the committees from the council actually is assigned to whenever there's any activity going around in our region, that is actually assigned to the negotiations, or finding out all the information of what's going on with even with the mines, just to protect our watersheds and all that, the runoffs and everything.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Derek. Without calling anybody else out, is there anybody else that would like to have a burning thought, or they'd like to share on this issue? What are your thoughts in terms of protection for source water? feel that most people have so far stated yes, that they're in agreement that that has to happen. But obviously there's going to be some complexities in how that goes forward. So maybe at this time here, because we're also going to jump into a funding discussion right after this, is on the chat option there, the Menti code has been shared with you, the link, if you wanted to answer some of the questions that are within that next poll regarding this item. So again, there's 3 questions that you're going to be answering in this survey here. Is that, do you agree that the new legislation should assert First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserve? And then question number 2 is, should First Nations jurisdiction be pursued at all costs in the new legislation, despite limitations that may be imposed by provinces or territories? Again, those issues of dealing with different jurisdictions and how all that is going to harmonize going forward. So do you feel that it should be pursued at all costs? Your thoughts on that? And then on there, in the next piece there is that word bubble. You can list, I think there's an opportunity to share more than one question or one letter or one word. What are your key concerns about transboundary jurisdiction considerations? So you can take some time to do that, and then it's also an opportunity right now for anybody to share some final thoughts on this discussion.
There's a couple of people who weren't here this morning, so maybe it's I know Megan Mitchell, I think from Akwesasne is here, and Joshua Isaac from Listicuch. So I just wanted to extend welcome specifically to them as well, and to say, I mean, you're both from nations that are living quite day-to-day transboundary issues. So if you want to chime in, feel free.
Yeah, maybe we can hear from Megan from the Akwesasne perspective. That would be interesting.
Hi. Yeah, I pretty much agree with everyone else. From my understanding and from what I watched in the video, yeah, I agree.
Okay, how about Joshua? You're also new to the call from Listicuch. Or maybe he's not available at his computer right now. Okay, so if we are good with this question, and again, it's never closed. It's an opportunity again to share your options in the chat option or in the roundtable at the end of the day. So if there's no final comments on this, then maybe we will segue into the funding discussion. Okay, that was a little bit of a shorter video to introduce the financing discussion. So again, based on the options that were discussed previously in the 2019 engagement, the one that was looked at more closely was creating a funding arrangement or mechanism that defines approaches and principles. And it should include funding mechanisms that commit to funding water and wastewater in its entirety, the true cost, and eliminate the competitive funding approach that normally happens, and evolve it based on community needs. So based on your experience in your communities, what would work best with regards to financing?
Um,
Go ahead.
Not sure if this is really what they mean there, but like here, like all the funding to do with the water is all like under with public works kind of shared funding. Doesn't have its own separate budget really. So I don't know if that's really what they mean. But I think it would work better if it was like a separate budget, I think. So
from the
like
higher level.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I was cutting you off. I didn't mean to keep. Sorry, yeah, so I think what they're stating with this one, again, with the creation of new legislation, it would create a different funding arrangement. Again, one that looks at true costs of funding for water and wastewater, different from the current arrangement that's currently in place. And it would change that need for competitive funding, which sometimes happens in the region where you're applying for funding for capital, and there's never enough across the board. And base on a mechanism or agreement that's based on actual community needs. So it's looking beyond the existing approach.
So if I can elaborate, Melissa.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's being here from AFN. So the current work that we're working with ISK, federal government, is advocating and putting them to commit to what they've already said about funding assets, all assets, 100%. And that means adopting a new approach, what we call asset management planning approach, that First Nations following that can look at determining what fully funding all of their assets to operate and maintain their assets, not trying to work with the insignificant or inadequate funding that's currently provided by ISK. The end goal there is to do what others in the world are doing, the municipalities, your neighbors, other organizations around the world. They follow asset management planning. Essentially, they determine everything it's going to cost to operate and maintain, protect their assets, and also determine when you will need to repair it, when you will need to upgrade it, what kind of maintenance do you need. So that's the work that we're doing with Indigenous Services Canada right now. They are fully supportive of it, in principle, I would say. And I think there is, and I think Kevin Page kind of alluded to it, there has been a significant funding already in operation and maintenance. Starting this year, it's going to start ramping up. It's going to be in the A base, and also with the fall economic statement that Minister announced some months ago, additional funding for water and wastewater, not only for infrastructure, but also additional money for O&M. But as Kevin Page rightly points out, it is a lot of money, but it's still not enough. So that's the approach that we're advocating. We're supporting it. ISK is supporting it. And I said in principle because we asked them what they meant by 100% funding. Our idea moving forward that would be 100% of actual needs. And they stepped back a little bit and said, we meant 100% of what's in the cost reference manual. So that's not where we want to go. That's not where we want to be. So they're hedging their bets. They know it's going to cost a lot of money, significant amount of money to be able to fund, in particular, government funded assets to do that as a start. So it's a different way of doing things, and what we're advocating First Nations to do. Many First Nations across the country are already doing it. We showed some of them on our last Housing Infrastructure Forum. First Nations are moving ahead in one form or another, understanding that they need to begin to develop those tools or use the tools that are available to start determining what your actual needs are, all the while understanding that it will take some time before all of the assets are funded fully. The government right now, I think, sees the need to do that by concentrating on providing additional funds for water, wastewater, O&M. So I hope that helps a little bit moving forward. You bet.
Thanks, Bing. So we open it up now for people to consider the question that has been posed on that option.
Yeah, I have a comment. Yes, and it alludes to Timothy's point about isolating the real cost of water, operation and maintenance and assets, but human resources are very important in the equation. It's not easy to get water plant technicians or operators, and one of the issues that my community is having is housing of these professionals as per water plant operators. So it's where Timothy mentioned what does it take to have a good water system, operation assets, but also provide good housing to get quality people to maintain a budget or keep the budget low, because when there's turnover and there's outside consultants that come in while you don't have operators, while the housing is not there, your actual cost goes, sometimes some years it's doubled or tripled what it needs to be. So on a long-term planning, I've experienced that in this community where we haven't had qualified operators and we had to outsource, and it's exponential, double or triple the cost.
Good point. Yeah, definitely. We can look at, it's kind of a stretch, we can look at some resource development companies that actually provide housing for their workers, and they recognize that in order to be able to retain workers, they have to provide as you're saying there, Glenn, they have to provide accommodation for them.
Exactly.
Yeah, just wanted to comment a little more. Like the way it works here is, all the operators at our plant, they're not there all day. We're everywhere. We're public works. We're not just operators. We're on the road maintenance, on the building maintenance, and sometimes we can't spend as much time as we want up there on maintenance because of budget wise maybe, or whatever reason. And can't really just hire someone to just do a water plant. They have to be everywhere, kind of working with public works everywhere else. So
even though
elaborate a little more how it works here.
Yeah. No, that's good, Timothy. So that is, so even though they may be licensed operators, they don't have a lot to say in what the priority is. They're being directed to, it's time to grade the roads, time to go and plow the roads and other things, right? Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of wearing of many hats, and it spreads people pretty thin. I think we've heard that from other communities as well. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. A lot of screens off, so it's hard to tell who's available. Maybe did Derek want to share some of his thoughts on funding, on the financing option there?
From mine, it's practically most of the funding source that comes from the agreement that we have with Hydro. So we're not really that much of a seeking for funding anywhere. It's just that whatever we do, we have a water supply committee that was formed. It's based from committee is formed from hydro and the technical workers and engineers in that committee. So that does most of the negotiations and everything and whatnot. And there's also a monitoring supply committee subcommittee that was also formed that does the recommendations to the supply committee, to the water supply committee. So pretty much hydro, we usually stick with the agreement that we have with hydro to meet their obligations. That's practically much what we do.
Just to clarify, Derek, this is the is this a Northern Quebec Hydro Agreement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
So a different type of setup there in
Yeah.
that region, part of the region. Okay, thank you for sharing that. How about Emily? Are you on the call? Maybe she stepped away. I'll go to Brendan. And what are your thoughts with regard to the financing? What if we can
I
pull it up
agree
on the
with
screen
the-
again?
Hello?
We can hear you. Yes.
Okay. I agree with the asset management approach. I think that's a good way to make sure that you have a solid grip on your finances. I think we had a workshop on this in Ottawa a few years ago, where they talked about doing that. And I think the main thing, and it did come back to what Kevin Page said was, we can study all of these things, but if you're underfunding the operation and maintenance of these assets, then you're not going to have satisfactory results over time. The other part that comes up with this is, I guess, for the asset management, is that you're going to have a pretty good cost accounting of your costs for your community. And I think what was going on was that there was the assumption that a lot of territories or what do you call them? Whatever you want to call them, specific reserves, is that their costs were going to be higher than the surrounding towns and cities, like that. You're going to be spending more money on a reserve than you will be on a neighboring municipality. But when this was studied, and I believe there was a couple of people that on this task force, they made a work group and they did some research and they found that it wasn't the case, that they were at a very comparable level. And in some cases, even a little bit cheaper. They're spending their money a little bit more wisely. So I think some of the things that come up here are like, are they funding enough? And I know going back to another workshop that was in Quebec City, probably a couple of years ago, I said, and I asked them, when are we going to get away from this formula funding approach? Because if you look in a cost manual, here's what we're paying for. They're saying 100%. Well, 100% of what? We're not wasting money here. You look at come to our plant, look around. We're not wasting money. The guys know what they're doing. We have good quality water. So it's not like we're spending so much per cubic meter of water to produce it and distribute it compared to our neighbors. So, and also their approach, or at least in our region, is that, well, they pay 80% of that book value too, so that you're even getting less, So the idea was going to be, well, what is it? We're not looking for, 100% cost recovery, if that's what you want to argue about, but there should be 100% cost accounting, so that you do know what your system costs to run, and you can show those data and those figures, so that people can say, okay, we can see all of these things. And what I mean by some of that too is that you have your quantity surveying and your metrics of how your system operates. You can show that and present that and compare. And of course, it's going to be particular to your territory or your reserve. I know some of the other reserves, it's different. In Guanajuato, we have water plant operators are dedicated to the water plant. They don't have other duties where we expect them to go somewhere else. We have other crews in public works for that. So when there's something else going on, they're dedicated to that. And that's that's a very important thing. We've gotten training and sort of like what I think somebody just said a couple of minutes ago. I think it was Glenn. And he said, when you have to replace somebody, you're going to pay a lot more. Well, we've run into that too, and our guys have had training. But fortunately, we're able to get some operators in there while our guys were training or had to take exams or one other reason or the other for, cover somebody's absence. But for sure, you do need to know your business of running the water plant, and it is going to take some individual analysis because if you don't have that, then it's hard to show where did the money go. If you're going to be reporting to your community or your council, you should be able to produce these figures and be accountable. I mean, that's community money. You're not taking it. You're not taking water money and say, okay, I'm going to build houses for somebody else. That's a different function. It's different account. So I believe that it should be based on the actual levels of what you're running there for your particular infrastructure. And like being said too, it is becoming more of an accepted practice, and it's becoming more popular in different cities. It still is something new for some cities, but as new as it is to First Nations and reserves, it is still new on some of the surrounding communities too. So it's something probably going to become more of a way to do business.
Okay, thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
Okay, so we are coming close to our end here. I'm going to pull up the Menti to answer some questions regarding the financing. So I believe there are 3 questions within this area that the legislation should create a funding arrangement that defines approach and it commits to funding water and wastewater in its entirety, the true cost. That's what's been discussed in this discussion here. And then the other questions of slide 14 is, should a national funding mechanism be created to fund water and wastewater, or is this too close to how things are currently done? And then the final slide is, what are your key concerns about including funding and finance in the new legislation? I'll give you some time to respond to some of that. And then you're off on a short break, and we resume back in the plenary at 2:15. I don't know. And it's also an opportunity as well to share any final comments at this point as well. But from what I've heard, most agree that there needs to be a true cost mechanism for the future. Okay, so thank you everyone for answering these questions in the Menti, and then we will resume. You can go back. It'll either take you, can leave on your own back to the main room, or we will resume back in the main plenary at 1:15. Thank you.
So those who are ready to leave, feel free to use that leave room button at the bottom corner. Otherwise, we will move you back to the main room when the time comes to. Again, that was at 2:15 Quebec time is when we will start back up. Thank you.
Okay, so that was a really good video and an explanation from Phil Tangi. Introduce the next discussion item on standards and regulations. And so for discussion now is the question. The new legislation should define some national standards and delineate others for local and regional development, and should include reference to First Nations culture, laws, and spiritual relationship with water as being important components of the development of water standards. So ties into what Phil had just talked about on what needs to happen for this area, injection of funding, the building of capacity, and he had talked about the maintenance of traditional perspective. So I open it up for discussion on this issue.
Hi, where would I be able to find the water, the legislation right now, like the one that they currently have in place with the Indian Act?
I believe, oh, let Bing speak to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's in the documents presented, but certainly you can get it at the government legislation.ledge.com. You can find all legislations there. I don't know, Delaney, do you recall if we put that in our documents?
I'm not sure. This is Jen with Aspen. I can take a look and see. I know there are some of the resolutions on the AFN water site. I'll see if I can find a link and put it in the chat for legislation.
I just
there we
put it
go.
in the chat right now. Thanks for the question, Emily.
And I believe if you go on the AFN website too, you can see there's a lot of information on there as well as regards to how all the resolutions and how this work came to where it is now. And you can see a lot of discussion items and PowerPoints from the previous water symposiums that had information that talked about the current act and the issues surrounding it. Again, what are some people's thoughts on standards and regulations? Do you feel like this is something that can be achieved through the development of national standards for some areas, and then inclusion of development of standards and regulations for local and regional development as well? Is there an opportunity to have a mix going forward? Based on your experiences in your communities and where you're from, what do you feel would work within your communities as well as within this region?
Yeah, Glenn, Pakwashipi, we have the provincial regulations from Quebec. We have the national from the government of Canada, and we're only missing the Inuit portion actually, and it's interesting, but it's just all the things we discussed today, it's how we pass from theory to action. That's the issue, and it's how do we, like all what we've seen so far and all for discussion, the new legislation should, like basically I agree with all of it, but it's just how do we go from where we are to where we want to be? Because the points are all there, the players are all in place, but it's just how do we put it all together? And I guess when it comes to like this, the water like obviously safety is and security is the number one issue. So maybe finding the common ground and start from that basis, and then put everything else into perspective once we develop a base of how to prioritize and where do we start, and then implement these this legislation.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So you're in agreement with a lot of the concepts that have been provided, but again, you want to know how is that going to go again from theory to practice and all the work that's involved in that. And I think that was alluded to a little bit in the presentation today. It's in the resolutions of the establishment of a joint working group between First Nations and Canada, and they will co-develop the law going forward. But before you get to that stage, we also have to ensure that engagement with First Nations has been done, that it's clear what are some of the key messages and components that would be within that framework, the law. So I don't know if I captured that being properly, but that's where things are at. And
is it up to the nations to push these files forward from a local perspective and make that a priority in each individual community to be able to move forward, or is it a top-down approach, or does it have to come from the community and push those files forward?
Let me see if I'm. Can you see me? I'm really minimize my screen here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, so the so the whole point of having these engagements is to get the support from leadership, and as you say, and as you imply, leadership is from the chief's level, the chief and council level. That would given information that we've developed over the years, going to annual general assemblies, special chiefs assemblies, and us providing the work that we've done so far, it is in a final analysis a decision by the chiefs, by the leadership, that would determine how to support this work, how to go forward and eventually provide support for a new legislation. And having done that, they would support I think one of the legal people had a good word for it, promulgation of that legislation. How do you take it out to your regions and to your First Nations? And part of that would involve considering how to develop your own regional entities, if that's the way you want to go. How do you establish regional organizations that would help implement those legislations? Very, a good example would be, it's contained in the current act, is the requirement to have certified or licensed operators. That could find its way back into the legislation. You take that one clause and say, okay, how do we implement that in our region? How do we implement that in our First Nation? It could say we have to have operators certified, licensed, and you will support that. You will support their salaries. You'll support the work that they need to do. So It's, I guess in some ways, when it gets to the legislation level, it's a top-down approach, which will end up at the leadership level in terms of implementing the legislation, in what form it will take. So I think that's the end result that this whole exercise is doing. Where will we find ourselves in 2 years, 3 years from now? We mentioned that 2022, we might be, what's the right word? Having a draft legislation in Parliament to be discussed, the first reading, second reading, third reading, royal assent, the whole process, and consultations. Consultations still have to happen. All this work we're doing is gathering information to try and provide the best information that you provide us on what a legislation would look like. But the government, Canada, still has a responsibility to consult with First Nations once they have drafted a law, a draft legislation. So, so we're doing our best to get the best information on what will inform legislation that suits us. And we say today, nothing about us without us. That legislation has to contain input from First Nation leadership, their advisors, their technicians, their lawyers, that kind of stuff. So it's we're kind of doing our role as AFN to facilitate that discussion. So, hope that answers a little bit to your question.
I saw notice that there was a couple minutes left. Can we pull up the Menti question? Thanks. I believe there's a couple of questions to be asked in this area regarding discussion. The first one there, that the legislation should define national standards and delineate others for regional development and must include reference to First Nations culture. And then there's another question regarding what are your key concerns about standards and regulations in the new legislation? And then there's, I don't know if we're doing this in the group or there's 3 final questions. What's missing from this discussion? Also, what questions do you have about this process? And then the final slide is, how do you want to continue to be engaged between now and the new legislation? So some questions to consider and think about, and please put your answers in the Menti. There's definitely a lot of information that was shared today, and a lot to consider and respond to. I think the videos are really good in setting the context for each section. Are there any final comments for this piece here? And I guess, yeah, the final pieces in here are there matters that you wanted to talk about that weren't included? And I believe this might be something that would be captured in the roundtable. I'm not sure. Is our time up? Are we being sent back yet? 1 minute. There we go.
Yeah, 1 minute. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I don't know if there's any final burning thoughts on this subject. It's your opportunity to share. And then
I'd
as
like
well
to-
there in the chat. Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to bring something out about the professional capacity. I'm sure many communities have to deal with maybe shortage of operators, like what was said. But even if you have more funds, you can only hire so many operators. And for instance, my water operating plant, water operators are 4 right now with 1 spare. And it's very difficult to keep the spare working so that he'd want to stick around to possibly, hopefully get a job in the future. So we have to sort of start thinking outside the box. We were able to get seasonal workers this year, and I'm able to put this guy in the field so that he is available. And what wasn't thought about or looked at very well, I think, in our community, was in the instance if one of our operators or 2 of our operators had gotten the COVID, they would be out for a good period of time, possibly, with only 1 spare. Yes, we can call the outside so-called professionals, but we would like to keep the money in the community, hire our own workers. So we are basically at a shortage, and there's really not much you can do. You got to be fiscally responsible. You have to keep your people working. You can't have somebody sitting on a sideline not being paid, and you can't have somebody being paid to do nothing as well. So that's one of the kind of from the bottom, I guess you would call it. Our operators are overlooked all the time. They're not thought of till something's wrong with the system, of the water, or if you're dumping raw sewage, or all of a sudden all eyes are on the operators. But there are the lifeline, and nobody thinks about them the way they should be. So something so that's possibly why there's no interest in applying to be a water operator, because you have a water operator that's probably going to be there for 30 years possibly, and it's very hard to get in that job unless you can be creative and keep them within the system somehow. Well, just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, Melissa.
Yep.
So you bring up an excellent point there, Martin. Succession planning is so difficult in First Nations, in any part of the operation, because of the limited funding. You can't have somebody like a junior person looking at possibly filling in when that other person leaves. You're rightly saying, okay, that person might be there for 20 years, and how long can that person stay around and hope that they will be part of that succession planning? So that's a big challenge, not just operations, but also for an organization like ours, like AFN. We don't have any spare surplus to hire people who could learn the positions and move up eventually. The other part is the thinking outside the box, and it's some First Nation, some tribal councils in Ontario, Northern Ontario, have developed the hub models where they're combining the resources for 5 or 6 First Nations. They brought in the operators into that hub model, and they're sending them back to their home communities, or even to other communities. So it operates as a hub. So there's several of those now operating in northwestern Ontario.